This is BBC 7.
When the Vikings arrived in Ireland, they struck terror into the hearts of the people. But the Irish fought back.
This is A Short History of Ireland in 240 episodes. Episode 21, The Wars of the Gael and the Gaul.
In the year 837, a fleet of over 60 Viking longships sailed from their base in the Orkneys and the Hebrides. They passed the headland of Howth and steered into the shelter of Dublin Bay. The striped woolen sails were reefed down, and the helmsmen raised their deep steering oars. Warriors slung their shields out over the gunwales, and, seated on heavy carved chests, they sculled in unison towards the mouth of the river Liffey. The men cried to their gods Odin and Thor, and shook great iron rattles to ward off evil spirits. The cacophony and the grim dragon carvings on the high prows of the longships struck terror into the people on the shore. The churches on the banks of the Liffey had no defence against the invaders, with their iron mail shirts and fearsome battle axes. No doubt these churches yielded a rich booty of precious religious objects, all taken back to the lands of the far north.
4 years later the Vikings returned, but this time they came not to raid, but to stay. By the Black Pool, in Irish Dovlin, that was formed where a stream called the Poddle met the River Liffey, they pulled their long ships ashore onto a dry bank, covered them and lashed them down. Then they erected a stockade for protection. This ridge of well-drained ground was an obvious place to overwinter and build a permanent stronghold. It's where Dublin Castle now stands. Each summer, more bands of Vikings arrived and settled there, and it became the principal colony of the Vikings in Ireland.
Just upstream from the invaders' stronghold, the Irish had made a crossing place over the river. Hurdles of interwoven saplings sunk with great boulders gave a firm footing for people and cattle wading across the Liffey at low tide. This was Achlia. Achlia and Dovlin together were in a key position. Here the principal routeways from Munster, Leinster, Connaught and Ulster converged. For the Vikings, their new stronghold was a base from which attacks could be directed, not only deep into the fertile plains of Kildare, but also against the British mainland.
In 857, Olaf the White, the first recorded ruler of Viking Dublin, joined forces with Ivar the Boneless, the son of a Danish warrior king, to attack Scotland and Northumbria. When Olaf the White was slain in a skirmish, Ivar won the leadership of all the Vikings in Ireland and the Danes in York. But this new power was to backfire on the Vikings, for their attention was distracted by too great an interest in Britain. The warring Irish kings saw their chance, sank their differences, and threw themselves on Dublin. A chronicle of the times, the wars of the Gael and the Gaul, states,
In 902, the expulsion of the unbelievers from their ship fortress at Dublin. They left a great part of their fleet and escaped half dead, wounded and broken.
But Dublin was too valuable a base for the Vikings to abandon altogether. In 914, Ragnall and Sitric the Squinty, the grandsons of Ivar the Boneless, launched the most terrifying Viking invasion Ireland had yet seen.
The whole of Munster became filled with immense floods and countless sea vomiting of ships, boats and fleets, so that they made spoil land and sword land and conquered land of her.
After 3 years, Sitric the Squinty advanced north from Waterford up the Barrow River and recovered Dublin for the Vikings after fierce conflicts.
Though numerous were the oft victorious clans of the many-familied Erin, yet not one of them was able to give relief or deliverance from that oppression and tyranny, cruelty and wrath of the brutal, ferocious, untamed, implacable hordes, because of the excellence of their hardy, strong, valiant swords, and their well-riveted long spears, and their ready, brilliant arms of valour besides.
Neil Glundu, of the Neil ruling family of the north, tried to fight back by putting together a formidable coalition that advanced on Dublin. There, outside the city walls, in 919, he was utterly defeated by the Vikings. Neil was slain along with 12 other Irish kings, and the annals of Ulster lamented,
Mournful today is virginal Ireland, without a mighty king in command of hostages. It is to view the heaven and not to see the sun, to behold Neil's plain without Neil.
These Vikings had come to stay. They made Dublin into a great trading city, a central port of call on the great semicircular trade route extending from the Mediterranean to Norway and Iceland and beyond. In one of the Icelandic sagas, this advice was given.
Fare thou south to Dublin. That track is most renowned.
Episode 22. Viking Towns and Cities.
The Viking invaders of Ireland established their first colony in Dublin. But this wasn't the only permanent Viking settlement on this island. All along the southern and eastern coasts, they converted their temporary ship fortresses into Ireland's first towns. But in the north, they managed only to establish toeholds in Ulster at Larne, Strangford, Carlingford and Ballyholme. The reason for their failure to colonise Ulster was the ferocity of resistance from the Iniel ruling family, who on more than one occasion actually defeated the Vikings on their own element, the sea.
Limerick, on the Shannon estuary, and Waterford, where the Suir, Barrow and Noah rivers meet to join the sea, became great cities. Many coastal place names are of Old Norse origin, the ancient language of Norway, and they indicate where the Vikings built their towns.
Carlingford, the Hag's Fjord. Wicklow, Viking Meadow.
Arklow, Arnkell's Meadow. Wexford, Fjord of Vague.
Strangford, Rough Fjord. Waterford, Windy Fjord.
Dursey, Deer Island. Smerwick, Butter Bay.
Dublin was the greatest Viking city, and the invaders also settled the country around it. The Irish called the area Fine Gael, which means foreign people, and Ireland's most recently created county council has been named Fingal after it. Here there are numerous place names of Viking origin.
Howth, Rocky Headland. Skerries, Rocks. Dalkey, Dagger Island.
Lambay, Lamb's Island. Ireland's Eye, Ireland's Island. Leekslip, Salmon Leap.
Indeed, the word Ireland itself is the name the Vikings gave to the land of Erin. And many Norse words were adopted by the Irish and incorporated into Gaelic, including the words for market, anchor, helmet, boat, button, garden, banner, rudder and penny. The Vikings of Dublin having been the first to mint coins in Ireland.
There had been high kings in Ireland since the beginning of Ireland's recorded history, but none had ever governed the whole country. So when the Vikings began their attacks at the end of the 8th century, they didn't face one strong ruler, but many kings. The Vikings never managed to conquer all of Ireland, but their invasion seemed to have encouraged the more powerful Irish rulers to try for the kingship of the whole country themselves.
Limerick was a great Viking city, but in the year 967 it was sacked by the men of a small neighbouring kingdom, Dalcash. The chronicle, The Wars of the Gael with the Gaul, proudly records this Irish triumph over the Vikings.
They carried off their jewels and their best property, and their saddles beautiful and foreign, their gold and their silver, their beautifully woven cloth of all colours, and their satins and silken cloth. They carried away their soft, youthful, bright, matchless girls, their blooming silk-clad young women, and their active, large and well-formed boys. The fort and the good town they reduced to a cloud of smoke and to red fire afterwards.
Helped by this booty, the men of Dalcash spread their power. With their leader Brian, they seized control of the whole of Munster. After many campaigns and battles, the kingdoms of Ireland yielded one by one to Brian. Everywhere he was known as Brian of the Cattle Tributes, or Brian Boru.
In the year 999, Brian overwhelmed a combined army of Dublin Vikings and Leinstermen. When Mael Morda, the King of Leinster, and Sitrick Silkenbeard, the King of Dublin, submitted to Brian Boru, he was acknowledged the High King of Ireland, and he became the first High King ever to win the support of every part of the island. For the first time in a very long time, Ireland was at peace. In 1005, Brian made a circuit of the whole country. He sent out fleets from Dublin and Waterford to levy tributes from the Welsh, the Scots, and the Saxons of England. He gave generous gifts to the church, to the needy, and to scholars. For almost 15 years, Brian Boru ruled as the unchallenged High King of Ireland. But Brian had made enemies. He had won his crown, not by birth, but by the sword.
In A Short History of Ireland, you heard the voices of Francis Tumilty, James Green and Richard